Hi friends, this is Jairam. I'm here to discuss the budget that was tabled today by our Honorable FM, Ms. Nirmala Sridharan. I want to start with telling you in very simple terms what a budget is. We have spoken about this before in one of the earlier videos, but I want to tell you what a budget is and then we will discuss what happened today. A budget, of course, is nothing but a listing of where the government gets the money and how much money it gets and where it plans to spend the money and how much money it's planning to spend. And all the budget is a listing of all of those things and saying, okay, here's how much I'm going to make, here's where I'm going to spend it. By the way, I'm going to spend more than I make, which is what happens in India all the time. The government spends more than they actually take in. And that difference between what they spend and what they make is the fiscal deficit, right? And essentially says, so I'm going to run short of money. How much short I'm going to be, I'm going to tell you. That's what the budget is. So today, if you look at the budget, at the highest level, the government said, I'm going to get in as receipts, taxes, etc., 32 lakh crores of rupees, but I'm going to spend 48 lakh crores during the course of this year. So 32 comes in, 48 lakh crore goes out. So essentially, I'm going to be short by 16 lakh crores. That 16 lakh crores is the fiscal deficit. And that, by the way, is going to be fairly low compared to what I had earlier thought. It is going to be back down at about 4.9% of GDP. Now, just as an interesting factoid, last year, the financial year 24, this gap between what the government made and what they spent was also almost exactly 16 lakhs. It is the same amount of money. But fiscal deficit as a percentage has come down. Why? Because the GDP has gone up. The GDP goes up 2 years in a row. So even though the deficit in absolute numbers is exactly the same at 16 lakh crores, the GDP ratio the fiscal deficit ratio has come down. The intent is for it to come down to 4.9% in this year. And the government has stated that they will bring it down to 4.5% next year. Just to give you a sense of what that means and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, 10 years ago, in the year 2024, our fiscal deficit used to be 4.5%. And then it stayed there, climbed up a little, it stayed there, but then COVID happened. When COVID happened, the fiscal deficit went all the way up to 9.2%. In other words, the government spent way more than they had during COVID, right? So at 9.2% in 2021, and from there, every year it has been coming down slowly. Now it'll hopefully end this year at 4.9%, the government has predicted. And next year, if it comes to 4.5%, essentially it means that in the 5 years after COVID, we would have halved the fiscal deficit from 9% to 4.5% and basically come back to where we were 10 years ago. We would be back to the exact same place in terms of fiscal deficit. That's the story with respect to the fiscal deficit and why it matters. The deficit is how much you're spending more than you're making, right? And so that's the headline number of any budget, is how much is that delta. That happens to be 16 lakh crores or 4.9%. So that's the headline. Now we come to the stuff that's really interesting, which is where is the government going to spend the money, which is where most of the interest of a budget usually is, and where are they going to make the money? I'll come to that as well. When we talk about where they're going to spend the money, I want to draw your attention back to something that I spoke about a few months ago when the interim budget was proposed. At that time, I had said that the interim budget is like a substitute teacher who comes in and teaches you for a little while. And in a few days, the permanent teacher is going to come in, and that's when you'll really know what the syllabus actually is going to be for the rest of the year. If you want to look at that video, by the way, the link is there in the comment section below. Now the permanent teacher is in. Now we know where we are going to spend the rest of the money. Turns out, not very different from what the substitute teacher had said. Very similar, but there are 3 or 4 important areas where some changes have happened. What are those areas? There has been focus that has been given to the agriculture sector. There's been focus that's been put on youth and skilling and job creation and some of that stuff. And there are 1 or 2 other interesting things I will talk about in a moment. On the expenditure side, between the substitute teacher and this permanent teacher, what this final budget has actually said is that actually I'm going to spend 50,000 crores more than I thought I was going to spend 2 months ago. So the permanent teacher is more generous than the substitute teacher, right? They're going to mark you more liberally. So they're going to spend 50,000 crores more. But then, oddly enough, the actual fiscal deficit percentage has come down between the interim budget and the permanent budget. How does that happen? If you're going to spend more, how has the fiscal deficit come down? It's come down because the government also expects to make more. The government expects to get more revenue than they thought in the initial estimation. In other words, while the substitute teacher is generous in some aspects, and they're going to probably mark you very, very liberally, but in other aspects, they're going to be very strict. They're probably going to take many more classes, and maybe the syllabus is just going to be way longer, right? So we will talk about what are those issues in just a minute. So expenses have gone up by 50,000 crores between interim and now, but revenue expectation has gone up by 1,20,000 crores. And that's why the fiscal deficit has actually come down between what we thought a few months ago versus what is happening now. Now, let's talk about spending. Where does the government expect to spend? First, the single largest spending item, which is CapEx. Capital expenditure is basically what roads we are going to make, airports we are going to create, tunnels we are going to build. All these road projects that you see, the traffic in your city is probably clogged up because of infrastructure. Yay! That is all capital expenditure. Capital expenditure that the government expects is 11 lakh crores. This is pretty much exactly the same amount that your substitute teacher told you, right? So it's exactly the same amount of money. Nothing has changed there. 11 lakh crores is 3.5% of our GDP. Our GDP expectation is about 325 lakh crores. At the end of this year, it will be about 325 lakh crores. 11 lakh crores of that, which is about 3.4%, is going to be for infrastructure building, roads, ports, airports, etc., right? Now, 3.5%, just to let you know, is a very big number. It's a really massive number. The only big country that probably has a bigger number than that is China, which at peak used to do 5% of GDP. Most developed countries are below 1%. America will be at 0.5%, for example, right? Most developed countries are below 1%. But of course, we are not a developed country. We need a lot more infrastructure. So we were investing a lot more than many other countries are. So 3.4% of our GDP is being spent on infrastructure. That's the big thing that you should keep in mind. This number has steadily been going up. We used to be 1.5% some 5 years ago. And that number has now gone up to roughly 3.5%, right? So every year we are investing more and more, a bigger and bigger percentage of a bigger and bigger number, because the GDP also grows every year, right? So a bigger percentage of a bigger GDP, we are growing on infrastructure. Clearly, the government has said that India needs a lot more infrastructure to get created, and we are going to continue to invest till we get to a point that we feel satisfied that we are more at developed country levels. So great thing there in terms of developing of infrastructure. The other area where the government has said a lot of spends is going to happen is on small businesses. This has been a big area of focus. How to get small businesses going. So MSMEs have got a lot of SOPs. So there are these loans that the government supports called the Mudra loans, where the government has increased the limits. There are some credit facilities called TREDs that are available to MSMEs. The government has reduced the threshold of that. So lots of different ways in which the government is saying, how can I get credit to flow to small businesses and get small businesses to flourish? That's been an area of focus. The youth I mentioned before is a big area of focus. Employment is a big area of focus. And the government has done a lot of different things there, both in terms of monetary outlay as well as in terms of some policy stuff that they have done and interventions to make sure that skilling happens in the long run. So for example, they've said, hey, we're going to work with some of the largest companies in the country and create some 1 crore internship opportunities for youth, right? And they said, okay, we are going to skill them and we are going to pay them a stipend. We meaning the government is going to pay them a stipend while they work for some of these companies. So the government is going to pay like 5,000 rupees a month or something like that for those people. There's also a lot of incentive the government has given to private sector companies to hire new people. And if somebody can prove that somebody new has been hired, the government has said, you know what, for this new person that you have hired, you're going to have to go to EPFO and start paying Provident Fund. I will pay part of it. I meaning the government will pay part of it. So they've said that for every new hire that you bring in, which is genuine new job creation, I'm going to start paying new. They've also said if somebody joins the workforce for the first time, the government will do a direct benefit transfer directly to that person up to 15,000 rupees or something like that. They'll give a payment in 3 installments, essentially encouraging people to join the workforce, because India has a little bit of a problem of people not joining the workforce, right? So government is encouraging people to join the workforce. So lots of things in terms of skilling and in terms of employment that's been happening. Also, the government has said, I'm going to create 100 different industrial parks around 100 cities in the country. So create zones where pockets of employment can get created for people. That's the other area. So all this is in that area of youth, employment, and encouraging skilling, right? So that's an area a lot of spend has happened. The other area where spends have been focused is in this new energy, renewable energy kind of space, where the government has said that the substitute teacher had told you that I'm going to spend, I don't know, 12,000 crores or 13,000 crores or something. And this government has said, this new teacher is saying, no, I'm going to spend 20,000 crores. So a lot more money being set aside for renewable energy sector. So for us to tackle some of the global warming issues, some of our issues around energy security, etc. We know what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. So energy security is a big deal. So a lot of increase in spends on the energy sector is something else that has happened. So this food security, energy security, youth employment, MSMEs, these have been some of the big themes that have come out here. There was one area where a lot of people thought a lot more money was actually going to get spent, but turns out that the permanent teacher has said the same thing that the substitute teacher said, and that is in housing. There was a thought that maybe Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is a very successful program, the permanent teacher when they come in is going to have a much more generous program there compared to what we had heard before. That has not happened. It has turned out to be exactly the same as was said before. So the allocations haven't really changed at all. So that has been a bit of a disappointment. From a market's perspective, you've seen some affordable housing companies, stocks and all correct today. That is because of this, right? There is also the interesting thing that I mentioned before in terms of spending. An interesting observation that you can make when you look at this, and you don't need to be a genius to figure out what's going on, is that compared to the interim budget, in the final budget, which remember that there has been an election in between, in the final budget, Bihar and Andhra Pradesh have got almost 30,000 crores of extra allocations for spending, right? So clearly what has happened in the elections has had some impact on where monies go and what some of the big projects are that actually get prioritized, as it should be in a democracy. We need to react to what the populace tells us. So there is a little bit of that as well. It's an interesting little side nugget that you can see as well. Okay, that's all about where the money is going to get spent. And as you can see, 50,000 crores extra spending, of which about 30,000 crores is going to Bihar and Andhra Pradesh. Now let's talk about where the money is going to come from. Right? And there was some expectation building up in some areas that, maybe there will be some rationalization or reduction in tax burden on the taxpayers. However, given that we are spending more and we want to have a lower fiscal deficit, that was not possible. There just wasn't any room. Looking at the math, there just wasn't any room for the government to actually give any tax offs. So in fact, things have gone in the opposite direction. There has been some rationalization of tax slabs, and so some tax slabs have been changed, etc. It's not going to be very meaningful in terms of the actual rupee value, but a lot of people will probably see some benefit of that. But importantly, taxes from capital market activity have been increased. Capital gains tax have seen a lot of changes. So long-term capital gains tax has increased from 10% to 12.5%. The short-term capital gains tax, there have been some changes for certain categories. It has actually been changed from 15% to 20%. There is this whole indexation question on if you sell a house, etc. How do you calculate the cost price? Is indexation allowed or not allowed? And there is some conversation still going on that. But in general, capital gains activities, transaction tax, a lot of these things have happened where stock market activity has been made a little bit more expensive. This might come as some disappointment to certain people, and you might have seen that in the stock markets today, there was a lot of chatter about it and there was a lot of movement in market prices, etc. But in a growing country like India, where a small proportion of people are invested in the stock market, it's absolutely the right thing to do. Some people will get, of course, negatively affected, and some pockets of capital will get a little bit more impacted in terms of return profile. But you need that revenue to invest in all these other areas that we spoke about, whether it is rural areas or MSME or women or skilling and youth, etc. The government has recognized this in this budget, that youth employment is a really big issue in the country. And so they're trying to make a lot more investments. And it turns out that it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not a cheap thing to do. And you might have to invest for the long run. You have to do internships and skilling activities and funding schools and colleges, etc. In the long run, you will create employment. It's not a short-term thing at all. So you need more money for that. And the government has taken on some of these capital gains things as a way to actually achieve that outcome. So that's the big picture of what has happened in this budget. We are spending a little bit more than we had thought 3 months ago. We believe we'll make a lot more than we thought 3 or 4 months ago. Some of it is going to come through higher tax burden on some capital markets activities. Some of it is going to come through higher dividend income and RBI dividends to the government, etc. But net, we are going to be in deficit a little bit less than we thought we were going to be a few months ago. So that's my take on what happened today. I hope you found this somewhat useful and interesting. Do let me know in the comments what else we could probably give you some more insight on. Thank you very much for listening. This is Jairam Sridharan, Managing Director of Piramal Finance.